So the objectives today are, we want you to be able to describe what a component is and identify different parts of a component. Write a function that utilizes createElement and returns a new DOM element. And iterate over a list of data, creating a new component for each item and attaching that component to the DOM. So similar to before, and there's some subtle differences. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the differences. I know some people, there's a small portion of the class who hasn't done the class version of this, but the majority of you have. So I may make some references to that lecture, but if that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. We will focus on the stuff here. If you still have questions on the differences, ask them in Slido, and I can try and address them at the end. So what is a component? This is kind of a nebulous question. If you were to ask it on Reddit, you'd probably get a different answer every other week. So let me get you a thread going here. Let's just take a poll. What is a component? What does components mean to you? So check that thread in WEB21. So you're talking about one of the benefits of it. I see a lot of reusable code in here. So these are true. Can use over and over. Exactly. And really, it's important to think of it in that context. We want to be able to, we want to build things so that they're reusable. You know, your boss isn't going to be thrilled to hear that they're paying you to write artisanal button components when they want you to be building an e-commerce platform. They don't even want the artisanal platform. They want you to just use Shopify and implement it and just get it done and get them making money. So really, it's about, oh, hey, I have my widget or my component that integrates my Shopify shopping cart. That's a component, a shopping cart component. So components incorporate a reusable logical unit. So when we're seeing here HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, technically, yeah, that definitely is 99% of them. So though sometimes you don't even need to have the JavaScript piece in technically, because a reusable component, if I just have a header, my header component doesn't need JavaScript. It may just have my nav links, and that's cool. So it's really the reuse. I really like that everyone's emphasizing the reuse. That's great. That's really the goal of components, and that is, well, that naturally leads to, well, Dan, okay, if a button's a component, but like a shopping cart component as well, that well, presumably has buttons in there to add things to your cart. If all of those are components, is everything just a component? Is it just components all the way down? And the answer to that is kind of yes. Like a lot, at some level, you are imagining, let me get this switched around. Virginia, we will touch on the Slido stuff next break, but if it is, I will answer these questions. We're staying high level on components. So they are reusable. Like anything can be a component if it's reusable and you can adapt it incorporate in one app and take it into another application. If you can take it from one project to another, that stands the test of reusability. That makes it a good component. I mean, even if it's not that reusable, it still is a component, but the goal of components is to be reusable. That's what makes this a little bit confusing. And yeah, as Christopher noted in the channel, in React, it feels like everything is a component. Yes, because everything is a component. And that's a great observation. There are components all over the place. And the idea is it can be really, or the thing is, know that it can be confusing. When you're a junior and you're talking about a component to another colleague, it's easy to misunderstand exactly what level of the stack you're talking about. So it's important, while components are very well defined individually, make sure you're talking about the thing you intend to when you're talking with your peers. So right here in TrainingKit, we've got here CSS components. Writing CSS for components is more about a mentality than syntax. So components should be modular or standalone. And so these are the common concepts that are going to come up over and over when you're working around in the space. So that said, well, you know, if I ask you to write a component and you just give me a button like that, and you're like, hey, here, Dan, you said anything to be a component. Here you go. Cool. Well, the whole point of these components is they're solving a given problem for us. They're designed to fit in a space like that shopping cart component. Can I add items as I go through your product page? Can I add them in a uniform way that's consistent to my shopping cart? Okay, cool. Well, you fill that space and you create a design to support that need. Same with a header, may not have as much interaction, or this nav bar on the left here, component, but it is not as dynamic or rich as, say, that shopping cart. So again, this meets the needs of our navigation right here. It was designed to do that. And also, you may have noticed it gets rid of some of the other stuff in there. I think there's missing a backlink. So they're working on it. But we got rid of a lot of the noise here. Again, we were able to do that because it was sealed up in a component. It was easy to isolate, and now it's easier to digest or focus on the content in TrainingKit. Again, a component let us easily change that, or only have one place to change it. Okay? So that is what a component is. And the different parts of a component, well, they tend to be made up of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, so another way, when people ask what is a component, saying it's a reusable chunk of code. Yes, it's a reusable chunk of code designed to solve a specific problem using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as needed. So did it need JavaScript? Over here, this probably doesn't on the nav. Cool, still a component. So know that it doesn't, by not requiring all three parts, doesn't disqualify it. So that said, let's move on to our next objective here. And write a function that utilizes create element and returns a new DOM element. So this is different than the way before, when we were using a constructor in our classes and we passed elements in and they use this dot and all that stuff. This approach avoids the whole this dot thing. So the reason this design is going to be very valid or very useful is that it gets rid of some of those gotchas that you ran into with dot elements or this dot syntax. So let me copy this into this objective. I'm going to take it over into my components1 starter, which that's not the one I meant to give you. Or I think this is, yeah. So here's my starter. This is the one I sent out in the WEB21 channel. So we need to build another accordion component. It's going to end up looking like this. So same deal as before, but we're going to build it using a different pattern completely. So just want to make sure everyone realizes or sees this should be familiar if you've done this. So this should be a very, very valuable exercise. So I definitely don't want to hear people saying this was just a rehash, because I promise we're not going to use the class keyword, and you're going to learn some different stuff in here. So write a function. Okay, well so what I'm trying to do is extract some steps. So if the objective is write a function that utilizes create element and returns a new DOM node or DOM element, aha, I see there's some joining words in here. So and, it's always a combination there. And so I see two other things here. So write a function that utilizes, okay. This is shaping up, this objective is kind of shaping up into a three-step sort of pseudocode. Not quite, but it's getting there. So write a function. Okay, well, let's see what we're trying to build here. This is an accordion with panels. Let's write this out as a, let's go here. So I'm just minimizing getting my Slack notifications to go away. Okay. So we need to write a function. The first step, panel component. So the panel component needs to use create element and return a new DOM element. So I don't know yet if it has to take arguments from based on the steps I extracted. That's okay. I'm just going to keep writing with as much as I know. So the next step is use create element. Okay. So const. Let's go and actually just copy that out of the training kit example. Document create element. So this is an effective way to pull out the steps and just try anchor off of them to make sure you're building in progress here. So and if these comments got updated before we even started the lecture. Dan Frainer, who does part-time, was working on this, and I love that man. So our basic goal is create a new function that will create a panel component exactly as you see it in the HTML. And given the component functionality, when the open or close button is clicked, the content is toggled on and off. Create components for each of the items in the above array. So in this challenge, our strategy is going to deal with, well, we've got HTML up here that is just not wired up. So we've got a panel. Let's look at this for a sec before we finish writing our code. So here's an accordion, and we've got these panels. This is just a template, however. So here, this panel, content of panel, this right here is just an example, and we want to basically implement this in our JavaScript. So I'm going to actually comment this out above here so that we can programmatically build that. I'm just trying to dump all the data we're going to need to flesh out more steps, because I promise there's more than just 3. Part of it is getting this stuff in here. So this is the HTML we're trying to create. And we need to use only DOM APIs to incorporate the data from this panel data array. And we still have 4 panels in here, but currently these panels are not. This is just an example one here. This is not the first one like it was in the old lecture. So we say create a new function that will create a panel component exactly as you see it in HTML. So create a panel component. Cool. So let's make a function that does that. Maybe create panel component. Okay, cool. So I need to make this build out a HTML or a DOM object that looks like this. So first steps first, let's create a div. And let's make this a panel. And we can make that a const actually. And what I want to do is actually go and we're going to create each of these pieces and attach them together in here. So we need a panel bar. And then we'll go through the next components or the next elements. So panel bar, and that's a div. And you can make these more semantic. If you want to make this a section, I believe that just requires a CSS change. But let's do it as it is. So I need a title. So that's going to be the H3 there. So I'm trying to make sure we've got a create element for each of the pieces of this. And panel buttons. That's a div as well. And then we've got two buttons in here that are open and closed. So let me go and make those buttons. We're going to stitch these together in a sec, but I just want to make sure we've got all the ingredients for a recipe. And make sure you update these tag names. Okay, so those are our two buttons. I think this part is complete here. And the next piece we need is just the panel content. So that's a div. Okay, so now the goal is we need to use append child with the idea in mind that these need to be put together in such a way that our structure remains in this hierarchy. That's why I was indenting this, because it wasn't indented. Your indentation is critical here, or else you are going to end up in getting your skis crossed and it'll be all bad. So let's take our div panel. Let's add the panel bar and the content, because the two elements underneath that are panel bar and panel content. You've got to add them in layers. So let's start with that panel dot pan child. And for here, we're going to do panel content. Okay. So this is so the next step is we need to add the next layer, and that's going to be panel bar. And I want you to help me, now that you see that you add one layer at a time, which elements or which variables do I need to add? Like, actually, go ahead, give me the code that I need to add. Do I add these to panel? Give me a thread here. Or I'll give you a thread here. So answering that thread, which do I add next? Do I add them to panel? What do I add to get these next step connected? I want to see where we're at. Okay, so, yep. Jordan, Karina, excellent. Yeah, add title to panel bar, because that's our H3 right here. Exactly. There we go. Priyanka, thank you. Panel bar dot append child title. There you go. Awesome. So make sure, so Vanessa, your append child with the H3 in quotes, you append child not with a string in there, but with a DOM node that we used with create element or we found somewhere else. Subtle difference, but you'll get some weird results if you pass a string into append child. Okay. Excellent, excellent. I love it. So, yep, Seth, Priyanka, you're on the next one. Yep, awesome. And the next piece is panel bar dot append child and button panel. And why? Panel of buttons right there. Excellent. So now we've added the two pieces here for the panel bar. Where do we add the buttons? That comes next. Let someone else answer. Let me get the code from someone else. Come on. I want to see someone typing here. There we go. Excellent, Andrew. Great. Which elements do I add next? Was the question, and excellent, excellent. So, well done. I'm seeing some fresh faces answer. Yep. Button panel.append child with the button open and button close. There we go. Awesome. Okay. Excellent. So, and this stuff like can be hard to shape at first, but I like to do this approach where I look at the HTML little snippet in commented out like this and try to piece it together. It is, if you go more elements than this, even I'll have trouble like trying to make sense of it. Like even 4 items can be hard if it's not something you've practiced before. So start small. If you find you're getting errors using this like exact approach, trying to mirror a full HTML template, there's other, we'll look at some other steps shortly to track our progress or console log what's going on and how we're progressing here. But excellent answers, everyone. Thank you for sharing those. And okay, so let's go back to our goal, our pseudocode or our steps right here. We wrote a function, we used create element, and it needs to return a new DOM element. Well, because we've stitched all the stuff together on panel, guess what? Panel is the one we want to return. So okay. Excellent. So now we've built this piece. We need to have a way to add it on here. So let's take a look at our, let's see. Did someone send a message in WEB21 or just delete it? Never mind. So let's move on to the next step here. So the first step here was remove the dummy HTML here. So let's get rid of this now that okay. So now that we've got something that builds it dynamically, let's just see if it works. And so to do that, we want to access the accordion, and we want to make it so that we call our function and attach the returned element inside here. So we took the HTML template out, coded it in JavaScript so that it can be dynamically put together. Now we removed it out of the HTML, and so in theory, if we put this all back together, it'll more or less look like it did without some of the text. But so first step, so the next step is getting our accordion, and then we can start calling this method and using it, or this function and using it. So we want to define our important variables at the top. So const accordion equals document.query selector. Okay, so here's our accordion reference, and what we can do is actually, if we use, the nice thing about functions is you can call them before they're defined. It's spooky, and it's kind of like time travel. And let me show you what I mean here. This is something you could not do with a class, by the way. Okay, so now I invoke my create panel component function. I could do it just in line right here in the append child thing because, well, I return a DOM node. You could also store it as a variable and manipulate it. Yep. And so let's actually see what's going on here. So I see we have our buttons coming through. You see those little things there? Let's go and inspect those, see what's going on. So you can kind of get a feel for how it's coming together. Because it's just not as obvious right now. So here's our accordion. Look at that. It's our HTML structure, just it's kind of missing some things. Okay, so let's go and finish up what's missing in the create panel. Let's not name it component. I keep forgetting that. Let's just say create panel. Doesn't need component, such a long word. Okay, save some ink. Okay, so I want you to help me out. Like, I want you to think about the steps required to get what's missing in there. Now, Let me get another thread going because I want everyone to get a chance to answer this. So what is missing when I pulled up the DOM, compare it to what's in my comment here? How do I make it look like this? What are the steps that I need to take? What DOM APIs even do I need to use to make my code, to make this function return code that looks more like this? With try not to give away the answer. Respond and thread. I want to know at least two things that are needed to complete this challenge. There's two main differences here. Yeah, the JSON data, the text is missing, and yep. Yeah, text content, class names, exactly. Text and classes basically did it. Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Great. I love seeing fresh names and faces in the answers there. Love it. Okay. So let's think about what we need for so if we're going to add our text values in here, well, let's decide, let's do because either one can come first. We can add the classes or the content. If we add the classes first, we'll see the HTML kind of take shape first, but it'll still be empty. Or we can add text in and it'll look awful until we add the classes. Just be mindful, it doesn't look like progress until it's done. So let's go through, let's pick the classes because those are hard-coded. I think those will be a little easier to add at first. So first steps first, let's give this panel a class of panel. Okay, so, and let me actually add some comments here. Sorry, I forgot to do that a couple times. So what we're doing here is set up structure of elements and define new elements, and then here we're going to be set. Okay, so panel dot class list dot add, and so here we're going to say panel, and first steps first, let's just make sure that's doing the thing. So hey, what do you know? It popped into a big gray box. I think that's a good indication. That's what we wanted. If you're not getting the results you want, remember to inspect. So seeing we got what we wanted there, let's go to the next class, panel bar. Okay, and we can just go down the list here and say panel bar dot class list dot add. Panel bar, and excellent. So now we can go up and let's pull up the next class. And this is basically how you build this process. So was that button panel? I don't know why I switched the name. Button panels, panel. I'm trying to antagonize my dyslexia. Okay. Button panel dot list dot add. Okay, let's see if that came through. Hey, our buttons are coming over on the other side. Look like we're getting there. Okay, and now we just need to do our panel content and our buttons as well. But let's go and content panel. And let's grab our button open, button close. And as I type it, you can see the things pop into place. So let's make sure we get our button closed. Or button. Okay. And by the way, if you have your cursor on a line, you can press Control-C or Control or Command, depending on which operating system, but Control-C and Control-V to copy-paste is a way to just duplicate the line. If you're trying to follow along on some of the stuff that's repetitive, and by the way, thanks for letting me know if this is going too faster struggling channel, please, thank you for letting me know. This is really important stuff. So the reason we're doing this is we want to recreate this. We want to create a function that serves to duplicate this entire block of content and give us the ability to inject content dynamically. And the goal is this right here, our title and our content are going to come from this JSON object up here. So title should be fourth panel somewhere when we're done, and the content should read here. We should see it under here. So in order to support rendering from a dynamic JSON object, we need to, the whole why of this is we need to be able to take this whole block of HTML, make it into JavaScript. And that enables us to programmatically create this thing. And that means if there's more data that comes down other than these 4 elements or these 4 objects, maybe we get data from a server that's coming down, and it'll help us. This is, or data comes down from a server, and it may be of any number of items. We may get 100, we may get 5, we may get 1, or none. We need to be able to handle that all dynamically, and the content may be changing in ways that we don't yet know. So we need to write a component that is reusable, and is reusable because it's reusable to solve this problem of we need a cookie cutter solution that'll just let us create panels at will. This is missing some pieces. So if you are confused or you're wondering like, hey, how am I going to add the content? We're getting there. Those pieces aren't in here yet. But let's go and inspect our code, our progress, to kind of observe what's happening so far. Just a little, slow it down a little bit. I know some of you are itching to keep it going. Hang tight. We'll get through this material, and I promise you will all get something very valuable out of this. So, thanks, Rebecca. This is the benefit of pair programming with like 200 other people. So let's go, whenever I change stuff, the elements panel down there refreshes, so it can be a little fun to inspect. But let's take a look at what we've built here with our class lists, or where these classes being added. Now what happens is, let's take a look. This panel here looks a little closer to what we have up here. Squeeze this on screen here. Okay, so we're just missing our content now. It may not look like much, but I promise you we're making progress here. So, you know, I said we're trying to support dynamic content. And the idea is, some of this isn't dynamic though. We've got things in here that are hard-coded, like open and close. So let's add those hard-coded strings first, because those are certain and stable. Because this progress right here, it's shaping up a lot like what we need, but we need to fill in these buttons. So button open, text content equals open, and okay, so now we've got our open close. And Melissa asked a really good question in thread. This is something that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with or have seen this error and maybe cry tears of blood when they see it. Cannot read property append child of null when I try and append the function to an accordion. This is a this is something that is very, very worthy, and this is probably what you're going to be running into. I know I may have done all the commands right here perfectly, but or without an error. It's far more useful to actually see me get this error though. So let me show you here. When we're at this step here, getting the accordion, if your query selector doesn't match something, like if I say ID accordion, it broke. And in fact, my CodePen doesn't tell me anything. I have to go into console, because this console lies. Don't use it. I saw people using it in breakout yesterday. I just could feel, I was like, no, don't do that. It doesn't give you the answer you want every time. I wish they'd get rid of it. But so let's go. And the reason we want to append this child here is because it's this accordion box right in our HTML is empty. It's just a placeholder. So all our code knows is there's an empty spacer or a placeholder for an accordion element. But if your query selector doesn't work or it doesn't match any elements, which you can check with console log, of course, if it doesn't match anything, you definitely will get either an undefined or an append child is not a property or a function of null. So make sure you're checking your work here to see if your accordion is actually or your selector is matching anything. Excellent. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so high level, we've taken out our HTML template, this little block here. And I call it a template. Like, I know there's templates mean things in different like front-end frameworks. I know some of you did React. Like, what I'm talking about is specifically just lowercase, just a block of HTML we're rebuilding inside this function using the DOM APIs. And the key thing is when you're creating elements, you only create the empty element. There's no classes added. There's no content. There's no nothing. So every step of the way, all of this is to serve building out this little HTML. So it's going to be a little verbose and really wordy, but this is really close to done, actually. So I'm off our normal time cadence. Let's take a pause right here. I know this has been a ton of stuff. Let's just take a breather. Let's do a 5-minute break. And I will review some Slido questions and try answer them during the break and try to optimize for time. And I will bring attention to those onto the video as well. So I will see you in a Type 5. Okay. So welcome back. Let's jump on some Slido questions. I love it. A lot of them are on topic. I know a lot of the stuff we had was messaging earlier. I want to just touch on a couple of the points here that were brought up. I know I'm trying to keep these on track, but there was one comment in here that made me think that I have a teacher in the audience. Trying not to put this so negatively, but 38 replies out of 200 students honestly says something. It does. And that is because there's a few factors, and I believe you're referring to the number of replies in Slack. I'm glad you're noticing that because that's something we're keenly aware of as instructors. When I say I'm ask everyone to put their data in or get their answers in, I'm trying to increase that number, but I probably fail to set those expectations at the beginning of the cohort. So that's on me to fail to set that expectation that everyone participates. That is my goal though, and that is the expectation here. So we want everyone to have hands on keyboards. I want you to let me know if you don't know the answer, because I will assume that the gap there is people just don't know. But then at the end of the day, I look at who's passed, who asked questions and help, and everyone gets there. You don't have to get everything in the lecture, and I really do pay attention to that data. So I just want to point that out. Okay, so let's focus on the lecture here. And I do appreciate, I see the comments in the channel, duly noted. Thank you. So let's go through some of these real quick. Say you're creating a for each loop to add a click event listener to each element of an array or node list. How do you know whether to use element, this, or event.target in the function to refer to the element that's being clicked? Great question. This is actually a super important question, and we are going to touch on this. Let me just highlight that. So I would like to see a simple or semi-simple component be constructed, and then exactly how to reuse it. I think I'm confused on the reusable part. So that's a good point. Like, what does it mean? What is the measure of reusable? Like, is it reusable if I can copy paste it from a blog and just dump the code into my site? Does it have to be a shared file somewhere between two projects? What reusability is going to be defined by like the big boss or the existing project you're on. Like, you will be able to look at existing files and say, oh, here is their pre-existing shopping cart. How is it being integrated? You'll be able to visualize and see in existing projects how they share the file between parts of the site. And it's going to depend on which frameworks they're using, what tooling, languages. There's a ton of factors in there. But the idea is, the end of the day test is, can you copy paste the code over from one project to another or from one file to another and make it work without having to rebuild something? That's really the measure of reuse. And Jocelyn, you ask, I find the way you made components today easier to grasp than the other way with a chain of classes. What are the advantages and drawbacks of the method you use today? The advantages are many. They're simpler. And honestly, like, there's a lot of people who have strong feelings about class syntax, and you can find those opinions on the Reddits and the YouTubes. I can share some links later. I don't want to get into the a heated discussion that senior devs like to stroke their neckbeards at. This is but as far as this challenge goes, you're right. You're observing this correctly. I feel at least functional components or just plain old functions are an easier concept to grasp. They don't have as much moving parts. They don't have to deal with the this dot weirdness and binding. We don't have to deal with any of those crazy concepts. So I personally prefer teaching it because of those. It's easier to digest. So I think that jumped around a bit. How comfortable do I need to be with components to move on happily to the next section? I feel comfortable enough passing the sprint challenge from the applied JS week. However, I can't make my own components without looking at old code. 100%. That is, you are in the right place, because whenever you're writing, you are Whenever you're writing components on the job, your boss does not want you writing the boilerplate every time. Like, they're going to expect, like, so did you steal it from the last time we did this? Or did you steal it from the last place you found this? Or could you copy paste? Like, that is going to be a very common thing, because remembering all the minutia and all the tiny details isn't a good use of the brain capacity we have. It's not. It's much better to remember, oh, where did I last do that? Okay, I can go find that. Or and if that's actually why I started my blog, is really as a personal notes page to just store commands and instructions. At first, it didn't have any real words on it. It was more just a collection of commands. And then people would find it and be like, hey, can you tell me about this command? It worked, but why? And that's how my blog was born. So definitely, you're right where you need to be. So when you create elements, does the order when you append matter? Is that how it knows who's the parent element and who's the child? The order does not matter. The order doesn't matter. So this is something that's weird. As long as the object exists, the order doesn't matter as much. And in fact, if you add an element to one place in the DOM and then re-add it, it'll only exist in the last place it was added to. It'll like kind of get removed automatically. Even though you didn't remove it, it just, if you've only done a create element once, it'll only exist once. So there is a way to clone a node. Oh, thanks for sharing that. I wasn't trying to be self-promotional there. And so the reason it knows who's the parent element and who's the child is, let me just point that out, because that's the important piece. Notice both the left value here, sorry, up here, panel has panel bar and panel content added, because those are the children. And then when we deal with panel bar, we add title and button panel. But in fact, if we move this up, that would still work just fine. So the reason I did the sequence like that is just to, maybe I'm just OCD in the stair step order of everything is where I was going, but really it is, as long as the right element gets added to the right parent, and the way you determine that is, well, if I've got a button, what's its parent? Oh, panel buttons. Okay, well, now I've got another button. Parent is panel buttons. So I need to call append child on panel buttons for those buttons. Excellent question. Can you elaborate on the differences between creating a component this way? Okay, let me clear that question. If you change your background to 9 cat, definitely. Okay, so this question often, again, this is mostly on topic, but I've heard this a lot, and a lot of people have upvoted it. Which is faster, document.querySelector or document.getElements by class name? There is an answer, but it is so rarely even observable that, like, even if you're trying to measure it, by measuring it, you're actually measuring the performance of like the overhead of watching the thing. Like, the difference is not something worth worrying about. And I would say lean towards using querySelector always. It will never raise eyebrows. No one's ever going to question that decision to use it. They may question why you're using a legacy API that has existed for like decades and is showing its age. querySelector and querySelector all are by far the best way to interact with your document, and far more powerful because you can actually use expressions and CSS selectors. The trade-offs aren't about performance, it's about versatility, and the mental model becomes simpler. So, okay, let's, I think this is something we'll cover. Let me just point out this. In after hours, I do occasionally jump into after hours. It's usually unannounced, and sometimes Henry and I will just nerd out, and and I have a lot of fun doing that. But I will add, when I plan to do it, I will announce that ahead of time, Because I know some people have messaged me that said like, hey, didn't know you were going to join and I had to leave. And why did you, like, the FOMO is real. So I will announce it ahead of time when I can. So let's move back to our lecture here. Keep upvoting those questions. There's still some good ones in there, or there are a lot of good ones in there. But let's keep moving forward here. So we've got a panel. It's doing these things, and we still don't have content. So our next goal is adding the content. So we set our class names up here. And so we want to set our text content. The first two are easy. They're just static text labels for the buttons. The next one, however, is the panel content. And the question is, well, where are we getting this content from? Well, this is where the function arguments come into play, which we haven't set yet, but I'm going to go do so now. Text content equals, let's see what our variable is called in the JSON object. Just content. Okay. And so just so that's on screen here, title and content are the name of my keys in the JSON object, or the array of objects, rather. So, and I'm going to then say title. Okay. Oh, wait, that. I don't want to, everything else is panel variables except the title. Let's make this a little bit more symmetric. You want to be consistent in your naming, and you don't want to be too verbose and give something with like 5 words, but there's a balance here. There's no like hard and fast rule on naming things. So the reason I changed this, it'll become more clear as you design more and more components. About the 10th component you build, you'll be like, oh, that's why Dan renamed that. Okay. But until then, don't sweat that too much. Just make sure your variables are not already in use inside the function. So where do I put these variables? So where does title come from? Well, functions have arguments. That's where you put in this. You can easily accept the input. In the class constructor version, we were passing in a whole DOM node, and then it was basically lighting up and figuring out everything from there. In this version, we're focusing on just saying, hey, give me a panel that has the title and content that I give you in there. So let's go. So you'll notice the color of these has changed. They aren't yellow anymore, which indicated that they were not recognized as variables. So here we have our, I need to add that. So panel title, okay, panel title there. And so now our variables are just content and title. Cool. And now our stuff's back to rendering. So you may have noticed that I'm not actually passing those arguments in right here. But let's go and see what happens if I do. And what do you know? Hi, Rosie. And if I inspect, I bet that Best Cat Award is going to show up underneath it. And again, like that may seem like I'm going super fast, and if you blinked, you might have missed it. This is where, like that last step right I just did, you may have to go watch the video again, and that's okay. This is really where we make it real. We kind of just scaffolded it out, the HTML, and cool, we could have done that in the HTML like it was. This is where we made it dynamic. This is where we made it actually do the thing. So you can see here, Hi Rosie and Best Cat Award. Still need to light up the events there, but I think we are making progress here. So let's go. And so our next step is, yeah, we got to make these events work. And in fact, also the close button, we want that hidden. So let's go look at our HTML to start. There's a missing class I forgot. Because if you notice when I started, the close button was hidden. And so I notice we now have 2 buttons. Classlist.add accepts multiple arguments. So the way you could do that is just like, so you don't actually have to write that multiple times. Now we have just open. So that's also valid. So now the next step is let's wire up some events. Okay. So this relates to that question that I highlighted here about a for each loop and adding a click listener to each element of an array or node list. Whenever you're in that scenario where you want to add events in a node list, you're probably doing it slightly wrong, because if you're adding event listeners to everything in a list, you can almost certainly just listen to the event one layer higher in the DOM, because the parent element, because of bubbling, is going to get all those events. So you can do that, and that maybe, I think there are some challenges that have you try that, and it's to exercise some array fluency. But the best recommendation is don't do that if you're trying to attach events to multiple things in a list. Here we've got multiple buttons. We've got 2 buttons in a list. So let me actually show you. So button panel. So what do I mean when I'm like saying, hey, don't iterate through the node list, or don't for each through the node list and add these event listeners to each thing? Well, what do you listen to? Well, or what do you do? So button panel, I could ask it to tell me, give me a node list of all of the buttons there. Like I can go down here and I can say, I could do this and say query selector button, and now I've got a node list, and now I can do for each. So what's happening is, if I were to add event listeners in here and say, so add event listener, this is a common thing you'll see, and it is a giveaway of a junior developer. So if I have a click handler on here and I'm going, like, this is already too complex. Like if you're saying I'm lost, good. You should feel lost because this isn't how it should be. But I see this all the time, so I want you to recognize the pattern of, don't do this. So if this is not what you should do, so let me put that there. Come on, emojis, why? Spinning wheel. Okay, there we go. Okay, so if this is not what you're supposed to do, well, what should you do? Well, let's say click handler is our function, which we'll define shortly. But the way you deal with this is, instead of getting a list of all the buttons, you just do it and add event listener on the thing, like that. So let me put a green check mark in here. Give you some clarity on that. Okay, so this will let us listen to the element above, and not the element above, the containing box. So our 2 close buttons are going to just have one click handler listening on them. So how does that work? Let's call this a toggle handler. And again, we need to create a function here to do this. So we can use a named function, or we can do this inline. Let's do this inline for now, meaning that. And right now we can say console.log button clicked, and we want to know what button, and we do that with, how do we do that? Let me get a thread going. I'm listening on the panel. How do I get access to the thing that was clicked? Virginia, May, exactly. Colin, right. Yep, target. So, and see some not sure's. Again, this is something that is part of the event API. So if you're looking for how this works, if you look up on MDN, add event listener, it'll tell you about the this event variable in the callback, and it'll tell you what's available there. So strongly recommend checking that out. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, event.target. Brilliant. So let's see if this is listening. Let's see if this triggers. So let me open my console here. Let me clear out the previous errors. There we go. Button clicked. Open. Excellent. So now that that's happening, we just need to have the next steps are basically, let's write some pseudo code or some pseudo code out to figure out what the steps are, or at least list our steps. So inside this click handler, we need to think about it. What we're doing is we track the click on the open button, and then we need to use the hide class or hide button class to swap the which button's visible. So button open goes hidden, and then button close becomes, we remove the hide button, making it visible. So let's, so here, toggle hide button on both buttons. So button open dot class list and dot toggle. And again, this API for class list is in MDN. If you search MDN class list, you'll see there's add, toggle, remove. All of them are available, and it'll describe what they do. With some of them have good examples. Some of those methods, you can, once you understand the stuff, feel free to add the documentation to MDN yourself. It is very easy to do. They even let me do it. Well, not let me. It's kind of a wiki. Okay, so we're toggling hide button on both. The reason is because one of them's already hidden, and by triggering both instructions, it's just going to flip them back and forth. Okay, so let's test that theory out, make sure it's doing it. Hey, open, close, open, close. Nice. Okay, so this is step 1, 2 here. So now that we've toggled the buttons, we've got a content panel that we need to toggle. So panel content, let's go look at our HTML or our CSS, because panel content, I believe, has a, oh yeah, this toggle on class. So you could just have one class for hidden and use the same class on buttons and the panel. That's probably the ideal way to do it, but I don't want to mess with the CSS. I just want to focus on the JavaScript side. So we can leave that for later, but here we need to visibility on of the content with toggle on. Sam, I saw your message. Are you asking, or are you? That's a great point, though. Okay, we got about a little over 15 minutes before lunch. I think we're tracking well for time. Might be right up against the line there, but I think we got time to get to the end here. So change visibility on the content with toggle on. So I need my panel content. Here we go. And I need to do class list dot. And the reason I know this is the sometimes you will get CSS that kind of has these sort of hints in the name, like toggle on is right next to panel content. Here it says display none, here it says display block. Okay, there's probably a relation there. It's not clear, which is like, so I'm reading into this and saying, well, okay, this is making the panel hidden by default. Toggle on, okay, I can see how adding that will override it with the block rule. The rules in CSS do read from left to right, and so the rightmost rule in the class attribute will actually take precedence over the other rules. Actually, there's a lot of other gotchas to that, but generally in this case, when you're using classes.add. So we've got our toggle here. Let's see if it works. Oh my God. Hi, Rosie. Best cat award. Well, I think so. And it's even saying open, close, open, close. Hey. Okay, perfect. So it's doing the thing. So that said, let's, we still need to get the JSON data in here in the, in this accordion placeholder. So right here, I just hard coded the values to check our progress as we go. I wanted the simplest form of this component. It's really hard to like design a component with all the pieces available, all the different pieces of data, and try to just do it all at once. So that's why I hard coded these values in here to just kind of narrow our scope. But that said, we're going to need to change that a bit because, as someone noted, I need to do a for each. And this is going to give me a data object or a panel. You can call it whatever, but this is going to be each of the objects in here. So data will equal an object where it has a title and content property. Okay, so in fact, let's add a console.log and say creating. Okay, just to kind of check our progress. So creating, and it'll tell us the name of the panel. And I want this bit because we know this code right here works. We can actually just copy it over and there we go. So we know it's happening 4 times, so it's working, or it's going through each of the items. Now we just need to say data.title in there and data.content. Hey, what do you know? First panel, second panel, third panel. I disagree. There's no all this Batman references when really we have Batcat here who's feeling a little neglected. But here we've got our panels. They're doing the thing, and that just kind of popped into view. In fact, if you're thinking that went way too fast, the last bit of this is too fast, the reason it was able to go fast is because we did a lot of setup at the beginning. We got a lot of the pieces done, and it's partly because I know where we're going, and I've done this, but as you experience and practice this more and more, you'll also be able to just know these pieces of this recipe. So let us go back and recap our objectives real quick. So we described what a component is. We identified different parts of the component. Talked about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, how they're not all specifically required, but generally components include all of those. Write a function that utilizes create element and returns a new DOM element. We did that. And iterate over a list of data, creating a new component for each item and attaching that component to the DOM. Exactly what we did here. So that last objective is conveyed right here. We loop through our data, we create the panels, and then we append them to our to the DOM. This is the this is really where everything kind of got tied together. So, And in fact, we know this is like reusable because if I had extra data that was coming in, or if I wanted to just, sneak my opinion about my cat in, I could do this as well. There's nothing stopping me from adding in, calling the method on its own. Like, these functions are really flexible when you design them like this. Class syntax, if you saw the last version of this components one lecture, classes can be really entangled and tough to work with. Functions give you a lot less ceremony and a lot less mental overhead to think of how they work. Functions, you give them arguments, hi Rosie, best cat, and then it returns something. It does the instructions. There's no hidden variable inside this or anything like that. So this should be less moving parts, even though it looks like more stuff is being done. We're accomplishing something different. We're actually we're creating the HTML template or the DOM template out of thin air. And before we actually had them all on the page, we were just enabling interactive events. So this is probably more reusable because all of it's self-contained in the JavaScript, in fact, with a bit of CSS. There's almost no HTML you need. You just need to know where to add your accordion. And in this case, that happens here, where I'm looking for an accordion class. So let me look at questions real quick, make sure. So we covered this one. And again, if you're trying to do a for each and doing events, again, check in the help channel how you can avoid that. I could probably do a 2-3 hour talk on this. I think we've touched on it enough though. So can we use inner HTML instead of text content? That's a great question. So inner HTML is one way to do it. After all we've done here, you know what? I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. We did it the most performant way we could have, but here's another way you can do it. So let me go to the bottom here. I'm going to create another function in like 2 seconds here and just say function create. And what I could do is say const panel. This is going to be a kind of a lazy hack, but you'll see it all over the place. So I just want you to be familiar with what you're seeing when you do see this. Inner HTML, we're gonna use a string literal. What do you know? Then I can return that. Guess what? This is kind of doing the same thing, and you can even put in variables here, and it'll almost look a little React-y. But the thing is, this isn't the most secure thing, and it's also not there's just trade-offs to it. Inner HTML, if you Google it, you'll see a lot of warnings about how insecure it is. But here, the thing is, we still would need to query the elements after putting everything in panel, and we'd still need to wire up the events. But if I swap out my code here, it still works. There, still works. But if I click open, nothing happens. So the reason why it's not secure, I would recommend Googling or looking into some more, because actually, you could spend a whole career on that. It's actually a whole area of security and content injection that's well beyond the scope of this. It's an area I definitely love chatting about. Message me. I'll look for some resources I can share. But so the risk is, if any content came from a third party, like if I added a script tag in my title, you can imagine some things would go wonky rendering this. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, that's a great point or a great question. But the way we did today in the lecture is vastly faster. It is going to be, even though there's more lines of code, it runs way, way faster, and not just a little faster, like, some of the selector differences. It's significant. So do developers create their own component libraries over the course of their careers, or does it not make sense when things like Bootstrap exist? Again, this is probably going to be, yes, developers over the course of your career, you're going to amass a whole a bench of scripts and code and just different techniques and methods you'll accumulate over the years, for sure. However, you're often going to be on a task or a job where they're like, hey, here's our component library set, or here's our material UI components and our style guide that our marketing team did. So listen to the big boss. They're going to give you that direction. But also, you don't want to spend too much time reinventing the wheel. The components we built today do already exist. And if a boss is like, hey, can you build me accordion? Don't think, oh yeah, Dan showed me how to do that. Reach for Bootstrap or Material or some other library that already has that, because it'll include a lot of the accessibility things and a lot of add-ons that have been battle tested across millions of sites. There are thousands of issues that have been fixed and incorporated that you can rest easy knowing that those are taken care of. So the skill, being able to use the components and build your own, will turn into, hey, I can pull together these Bootstrap components. Oh, and now my accordion is actually showing you your in-progress order versus your current shopping cart or something like that. So you may use off-the-shelf components to build higher level or higher order components at the appropriate level. But again, that's going to take experience and also understanding the requirements on the job. The comments on this question about detailing projects and stretches we should be working on right after the lecture. The work after the lecture I want you working on today is going to be the exact same challenge from before, except you have to use the techniques that we did today. So instead of classes, I want you to use functions. That is what you're working on today. We'll work on getting the clearer communication. We're just in a weird period as we transition between the curriculum tracks. But that is what you need to be working on today, is using functions to accomplish what you've done previously. So can you explain the difference between components and modules? I can. This is kind of like the difference between libraries and frameworks. It's more marketing and more perspective than it is like or context than it is something that's a hard and fast rule. I mean, there are literal differences. Like a module means certain things in certain parts of Node, certain parts of front-end frameworks. So it's context-driven. Sorry, I wish developers weren't so annoying with language acting like it's so hard and fast. And this is a science when they clearly take liberties with the words. But yeah, module can be you can loosely refer to the code we wrote today as a module. Maybe if it was in one file, I could say, hey, give me that accordion module. And I would expect that team member to know what I was talking about. I may not be technically correct, but is pulling data from objects inside of a JS a common way of storing static data? Yeah, like oftentimes site config data will be put in there. Like, again, my blog has a lot of config data that's in static files. So to be honest, I do not remember components the way it was taught the first time around. Is this method we're learning today more tedious? Is there a far less text solution or a faster, less text solution? I think we looked at the inner HTML one, but that has trade-offs. Like all these things, there are pros and cons. It's hard to just list them all. So I recommend building things with this. And if this method today you thought was more tedious or less tedious, it's honestly not going to be up to you when you're dealing with your boss and they're like, hey, we need a functional component that does this. You may be like, hey, I want to do it this way. It'll be easier. And they'll be like, no inner HTML, no nothing. You need to do it this way. And the reasons are our security and our policy is X and Y. You don't get a say in that stuff. So embrace the tedium, embrace it. It really will pay dividends and it'll battle harden you for the job. I totally couldn't do this on my own without referencing the lecture. Does anyone else struggle with this? Should we know exactly how to do this? This component stuff is pretty tough. 100%, you are not alone there. There are a ton of students who feel the same way. And honestly, like the same reason why students go back to their prior work, or the same reason I go back to the last component I built when I get tasked with, hey, give me a component with, or give me like I said, my shopping cart example. I don't go to write that from scratch. In this case, I've already done it before, but I can't remember what I did. I will go and copy that work. Same thing when you're looking at old lectures or re-listening to the lecture. It takes a lot of reps to get this and internalize it. What does classless do? What is JSON? Can I get some PMs to help answer that stuff? We're just a little out of time here, and excellent. Just seeing if there's any questions that are from really recent that are things I don't think I covered at all. So what we're doing is not a constructor function. Again, like some of the words, you may see it called that in some examples or blogs. In fact, I found one yesterday. I wouldn't call it one, but and that's because, yeah, we do not have a prototype and we're not using this. That's why. Exactly right. Hey, I end up doing trial and error. You're on the right track. Do trial and error. Like, that's very effective. It's far more, if I just spill more words on the difference, it probably is not as effective as getting the experience practicing it. And this question, why do you use data inside the for loop? We're at 12. Okay. I want to respect everyone's lunch and your time. I will reply in here. If you want to look at the answers I send, I will type these up in here over lunch. Thank you all. I hope today went a little smoother. Again, please let me know your feedback. Reach out. I really do care to know. Thank you all.